Hey everyone, welcome to KwadWorx. I'm Nova FPV and today we're going to look at soldering. We'll be going through the individual components of soldering and why each is important. Now, this series that we're doing is going to be a whole compilation of, so to say, short and sweet videos. Today's episode is going to be covering your basics of your tools. We're going to go over soldering irons, solder, flux, how to clean up your different iron tips. There's some differences in iron tips, how to use them, well not really how to use them, but what they're used for, and some extras which will be quite cool. Anyhow, getting straight into soldering irons. There are two major types of soldering iron, this being the first type that you'll encounter. These are some inexpensive hobby soldering irons. They are just, you plug them straight into the wall. They just literally go straight into the wall. These Okies are nice, but they're not really powerful enough for most continuous long solder sessions when you're soldering for like an hour long with different parts and working on drones or circuit boards and stuff like that. And their tips aren't really replaceable. It's sometimes just cheaper buying a new soldering iron than buying a new tip. These tips are kind of weird. For instance, this one fits into a sleeve, whereas this one, you screw the sleeve off. Come on. And then the tip itself is a sleeve for the heating element. So they kind of wacky, like I said. Like this one you might be able to find these tips, but sometimes it's just easier buying a new iron if your tips are broken. But yeah, getting into what you actually need. You actually will need one of these. This is a soldering station. It's got variable temperature. The tips are nice because the chips are replaceable and they're readily available. Those are my two main tips. If I needed more, I would have more. These are all I need. Getting to the different tips while we're at the subject is these two tips. As you can see, the one's a bit bigger than the other. This tip is obviously older, but this is what I use on my bigger wires. For instance, the wires that run out of your 4S LiPo batteries and that you put onto your drone for power and stuff like that. That's for thicker wire, whereas this I use for thinner wire, like I'd say 26 gauge and thinner. I'd probably use this simply because this carries heat less efficiently than this. This is a nice big fat tip. You can apply a lot of heat and it'll hold onto its heat, whereas this, you can apply the same amount of heat, but it'll lose its heat quickly because it's not such a thick core. That's the two main tips that I use. Another important part when it comes to soldering is that you need to keep your tips clean. If they're not clean and you constantly, there we go, there we go. If you don't keep them clean, they will degrade. They oxidize, they burn out, you overheat them, they burn out. The best way to do that is to have a place to wipe your tip off. Get all this excess solder junk off, all of this stuff. Now this is a very simple method. It's a piece of sponge in a bowl. This is a different one. This is incorporated into a solder stand, which is nice. And a lot of the people in the community I've noticed get these, but they don't wet them. But people, please wet the sponge. It's how it works. It'll expand and then that's how that sponge works. While we're on stands, I've got two main types that I use. I've got a point down and I've got a point up, as you can see. Now why would I want to point up? Well, a point up is brilliant when you're holding two wires together that are pre-tinned and you just want to heat them up so they solder. So then you would just put them on your soldering iron and they would solder. Whereas with the point down, you can't do that exactly. That's why I've built myself a point up and I've got a point down, and I use my soldering tip cleaner over there. Now another aspect that you'll find a lot is you ask yourself, Nova, what solder do you use? Do you use thin solder that is flux cord, or do you use thin solder that's not flux cord, or do you use thick solder? What do you use? What do the rest of the people use? What do you recommend? Well, guys, I use thick solder that does not have a flux core. Why do I use thick solder that does not have a flux core? Well, when I'm soldering, I don't want to have this much solder out, heat up something, and then constantly just keep pushing it in. And that's what happens with thin solder. Here you just dab it on. Though that does take some practice to know how much to dab on, but yeah, you dab it on and you got a good amount. And I've also noticed some people use solder that looks like this. If you have solder that looks like this, please just throw it away. It's not worth it. You're going to be introducing so much dirt into your solder joint that it's just not healthy. You won't get good continuity. Your solder joints will be cold solder joints. It's just not good. Now, Nova, what do you use? I mean, your solder isn't flux cord. Well, I have flux for that. I have flux for that. Now, I've got two different types of flux. This is rosin based, whereas this is, it says water soluble, but I don't know what, I think it's a chemical flux. I just call it white flux. I still don't know why I call it white flux. Anyway, what's the difference between the two? Well, this one's older one, and rosin based flux normally leaves a very good flux residue on your circuit boards. Now, to show you what that looks like, I don't seem to find, I can't find my circuit board now anyway, but it normally leaves like what looks like a little watermark on your boards. That's where this comes in. This is isopropyl alcohol. I think it's also known as rubbing alcohol. I got this from a place called 3D Printing Store in South Africa, Centurion. Brilliant stuff. Just apply this using either a pig's hair brush like this, or what's known as a chemical friendly brush. I don't know exactly where to get that, but yeah, this is what you use. You'll just put this into one of those bottles, and then you just spray it on your circuit board and then give it a good wash. While I've got this in my hand, what is this thing? Well, this is a solder sucker. You'll crank it, you'll heat up the joint with your soldering iron, and you'd come in and you'd push the button, the plunger would pull back, hopefully sucking up solder, but 9 times out of 10 it just splats the solder all over your board. I don't recommend using one of these. I'd rather get some solder wick, which I don't have at the moment. Another way to do that is to clean your tip off, heat up the joint, scoop it almost, I'll show that in a later tutorial, and wipe off your joint again. This over here is a very nice little thing to have. What it is a baby vise with a hole in it for magnifying glass, and I bet you can understand why that would help, because when you're soldering something small, it really helps to be able to see what you're doing, because seeing is believing. But seeing what you're doing is very important, and I'd highly recommend getting some way of magnifying what are you doing. And that's about it for this video. This has just been the breakdown of my different tools. Sorry, it's a bit pulled out. I like to get into the nitty-gritty details. If you like what you saw here, please tell me in the comments. If you think I left something out, please tell me in the comments as well. This is a brand new channel. We want to get it growing. And please Stay tuned for our videos. Goodbye.